tuning in with KrASIA, bringing human stories to life.
Hello and welcome to Oasis by KrASIA. My name is Taro and I'll be your host for this episode, where I speak with Anthony Sar, co-founder and CEO of FinnoVasia. Founded in 2015, FinnoVasia is officially the organizer of Hong Kong FinTech Week, the flagship industry event in Asia with over 15,000 attendees from 130 plus economies. Anthony is also the founder of FinTech Club, an exclusive community for senior executives in Hong Kong, and FinTech Basketball League, which brings together 18 teams among the industry professionals in Hong Kong. So, FinnoVasia, you mentioned that it's been 5 years now. Looking back from day one basically to now, how have you found that journey of growth, starting from the very beginning?
Yeah, overall context basically, I myself, how I end up in Asia, why I'm in Hong Kong, and why FinTech, and why the conference, right? So I was born in Siberia, back in Russia. And then when I was young, I was invited to work for the leading business newspaper as a journalist in Moscow. And after like 5-6 years working, I worked for a corporate a little bit on the PR side, which I don't really enjoy. And then I got into MBA school. I went through like a fellow fellowship through the competition. There was a brand new school in Moscow called Skolkovo, and they have different modules across the world, say in India or in US with MIT or in Brazil and so on and so on. So the idea was to get acquainted the most practical, kind of get knowledge from different parts of the world in emerging markets. And one of the modules was in Shanghai, so that's where I was back in 2009. And I decided that it's a great country with great opportunities. I feel like China is definitely, and I felt that before, and I even stronger feel it now, that it's basically the fastest growing, the most influential destination globally that will drive further growth in the future. And it's dynamic, it's like dynamic too and growing, but there's certain limitations. And then there were like period of a lot of dependence on oil prices, so it's kind of boring. So within Asia, there are much more opportunities. For me, it was like a choice of going to any Western countries, but pretty much not that exciting, I felt. So I ended up trying to find something to do in China, and that's how I ended up in Hong Kong. And my first company I started was while I was doing this MBA course, a friend of mine asked me to help him to bring 100 people corporate from his company, like managers and so on, and to give them a tour around China from the innovation perspective to show what innovation is happening in China. So I just helped him as just a kind of a part-time project, and I found that there was a lot of demand for that. So I started to organize this kind of tours mostly for my connections back in Russia. So I would bring corporate groups to Singapore, or Hong Kong, or Japan, or South Korea. And we will go to all this, the most innovative cutting-edge tech companies for different industries. I did this for like 5 years. And one of my latest groups that was focused on banking innovation. So I brought them to Hong Kong and Singapore. That's where I discovered actually there's a whole world, new world, sort of where technology meets the finance. And myself, I was never interested in finance, to be honest. I kind of felt there's certain disparity between guys with, Harvard, Oxford education and with expensive suits in the skyscrapers. And I went through the mortgage myself, where you have tiny font there with complicated, formulas. People basically, in many ways, and after the financial crisis with all these banks, going sort of extremes, I feel like there's certain lack of competition, I would say. And in Hong Kong, it's pretty obvious. You have like a few, 2-3 banks, like most of countries. And this industry is way like behind. And then I wanted to do something, refocus from more like education to actual technology driven something. Then I realized that Hong Kong is a very tiny market, like 7 million people. So anything technology wise, it will be really limited to the 7 million. Anything else, you can do it in China. But in China, as a competition, Chinese will do it better, faster, cheaper than anyone else. However, Hong Kong is the place where a lot of finance people, there's a lot of banking, financial institutions, insurance companies. And if you merge it with technology, that actually you could leverage on both the fast growing technology innovation space and meets with the actually quite sort of wealthy and sort of mature, powerful industry like finance. That's back in 2015 when I decided to go to learn more about finance and technology. So the FinTech term that only appeared the first time at that time. So I went to the few conferences in Hong Kong that called themselves Banking Innovation, Finance and Technology. But the only thing I learned that this conference were really crap. So it was just really, really bad. Like there was not much you can learn. There was a lot of kind of group photos, that kind of stuff. zero knowledge, not much networking. And I was shocked. I felt like, why Hong Kong doesn't have, like, where these people can actually learn and get this information. And then I started to meet a few people from the industry. I called up 100 people who were doing FinTech, and I put the cameras. I said, come over for the interview, and I would interview you, and I would make a video series about what's going on in this industry in Hong Kong. So within 1 month, I interviewed around 100 people. Out of this 100, we created a few episodes of the series, which we called the future of FinTech. Came up with the name FinnoVasia. It's finance innovation in Asia. But this helped me also get the maximum knowledge of what's going on and meet all the key people in the industry within 1 month. So I knew everything possible, the summary of what's going on in FinTech, and get access to these people. And we produced these videos, which were also quite good traction because no one actually cared about this industry. And then, since there is no conference, no good place to go for these people, I decided, okay, we will create conference. That was not my plan, but that's what we decided to do. And I thought, okay, so there were, out of this 100, half of them were good speakers. So I felt it would be great to put them on the stage. So we did the first event. It was 2015. It was 300 people, and people love it because we did this in a completely different way. Basically, I asked myself what kind of event I would love to go, and we created this like this. So we had a team of 5 people at the time. We worked from my apartment because we wanted to save on the rent, and it was early days, and we didn't have any banking loans. We didn't have any investor. We just started. It was also my co-founder, Villa Wong. She's from Hong Kong, and none of us had a conference experience. Basically, we were like, okay, what kind of conference I would enjoy myself? So our conference was pretty new kind of format for people. It was tech-driven conference with a lot of fun, with cool lighting, with the ZZ Top playing in the morning. We had the whiskey sponsor. We got everyone whiskey bottle so people were like shocked. They were not acquainted of that kind of format for the banking conference because that should be boring, most of the time. So that's how the standard was. We just started to shake this whole thing in Hong Kong, and people loved it. We had a big party in a nightclub with the pitching competition of 1 minute with the VCs. And there was a lot of great energy in the room, and these people are amazing in FinTech industry here at the time. They really want to challenge something, the status quo. And that's what basically we put us as a mission. So my believing is that if we could help this people in FinTech industry to actually grow and bring this innovation in the sector, then there will be a much more competition. There will not be 2-3 banks. It will be 20, 30 different options for people to choose. Then what happens that the prices will go down, the fees will be gone, the customer service will be better, everything will be cheaper, faster, more convenient for people. And society will win. The end customers with like a population, the people, they will be the winners of this. So I felt that is a great opportunity to actually reshape this whole industry in a way that competition into that. And that's what I was always focusing for us. Basically, this is the criteria when we work further for the last 5 years. We always would give priority to someone crazy enough to actually challenge and bring something new to the market, even though they're small. But we feel our mission is to help them, to bring them on stage, to really push them and help them to push further and grow further. But also, at the same time, we work with banks, and we feel it's also our purpose to help the banks to also change and transform themselves. So that's how we started. And then next year, we had another event. There was already like around maybe 600 people. Hong Kong doesn't have much space for the physical event. So the only option was to get to the convention center, but the convention center told us maybe you can call 2 years later, and maybe we'll put you on a waiting list or something. So we tried for months and months to get any space, but because the convention center is occupied with many events like Baby Trolley Expo, they have toilet fitting expo, that kind of stuff, and it's already booked for 2 years ahead, and there's no way you bring it in. So the government announced that they plans to do the Hong Kong FinTech Week, which is a flagship event for Hong Kong, which brings together regulators, governments, and private sector. And they invited us to be part of this, and eventually we became the solo exclusive, basically, organizer of the Hong Kong FinTech Week. So when we were invited, there was multiple organizers, and the event was around 500 people size for the first year. We managed, basically, last year we had around 8,000 people attended from 70 countries. I need to double check. 12,000 people throughout the whole week, but around 8,000 people was within the 3 main days of conference. And this year we had basically over 1.2 million people watch the online format of the event, which we feel it's a great sort of achievement. So we are not one of the largest FinTech events globally, yes. But in Hong Kong, we are probably the largest technology or innovation or business or financial event. So even though it feels like a niche one, but actually it became probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, actual technology or business event in the city. So that basically a quick story of 5 years in the context.
And you've come in with a bit of an attitude to change things up. Now, has that presented challenges in itself?
Of course. I mean, every day, like anything new, you need to convince people. You need to, like back when 2015, it was difficult for us to bring sponsors on board, especially from financial services. Like, big banks, it takes a long time for them to actually build relations and trustful relations with them. It's not about the money or budget. It's about, their brand, how they trust you. And us, like a 5 people, a team working from my apartment was not the most we were new and we were a little bit crazy compared to most of prominent established events in Hong Kong. So it took us years to actually build this trust, but now we have quite a good relations with most of the serious financial institutions and we have this trust, but it took a long time for us to prove them and for the government as well and for the regulators. So all this parties, they're quite, I would say, conservative, but at the same time, we consistently showed them that, okay, we deliver, we're always trying to over-deliver the expectations. That's basically how we put as a principle. So we'd rather over-deliver than under-deliver what people expected. So we set expectations at a point and potentially over-deliver. And over the years, we managed to build this trust. And I can tell you one episode, for example, if you remember a couple of years ago, there was the whole thing about Bitcoin, ICOs. So there was a lot of crazy stuff happening, money falling from the sky on people. And we are in this industry, right? So see many of our sort of similar companies that do certain events, they actually jump into this opportunity to work with, blockchain, Bitcoin. It sounds very sexy, very cool, and ICOs, and, these guys were paying money just to get the exposure to whatever. And we took a very distant approach towards this craze. I mean, don't get me wrong, I feel like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, it's actually quite a fascinating topic, and I feel like there's definitely a future. We were the first one to bring Vitalik from Ethereum back on the stage at our event, on that big stage in Hong Kong back in 2016. And the reason, because I personally admire him, the way how he sees the world, how he wants to change it. And that's in line what we want to achieve, right? But then when we saw that it became more like a speculative thing, I felt like if Bitcoin goes up and people buying, people selling, I don't feel how this can really impact the society in a better way. The question that we ask ourselves, how this or that will help to create a competition, how people can benefit out of this. Maybe a few people can benefit out of buying and selling, but eventually if you're seeing this, what happened later with this Bitcoin, with ICO, when it's all crashed, a lot of people actually got hurt. And in our case, we actually were very distant from all of this. We didn't take any opportunity to work with any of these companies yet because we wanted to take the approach, we wanted to see how these things will develop. And eventually, we do invite a lot of people from blockchain space to speak, but we are quite selective and trying to be very selective on whom we bring in on board and trying to see whether they really have trying to truly impact things, or they just, leveraging on the trend and trying to speculate on that. But that helped us to also build this kind of trust from the audience, from our partners, because they see us not opportunistic, but actually cohesive and sort of stick to what we want to do, not just jumping into this opportunity to get quick money. That's basically one of the examples. But yeah, this is the biggest challenge, is to push everyone, especially. But we see also government and regulators back 5 years ago. When we came, one thing I want to get rid of, it was this podium on stage, especially politicians, and, they love this podium. They want to be on the podium, but it's just not how it should be nowadays. It was fine maybe 20 years ago, but today you need to be open to people. You need to show this transparency. You need to be casual. That's a new generation. So it was quite challenging to convince them. But then we see now they're quite flexible. They actually even going even further and make it's like fully like a Steve Jobs presentations. So I'm happy to see that, and I'm happy that we helped to, push the whole thing to make it more human.
That's fantastic. 2020 obviously has been a pretty challenging year in general. There's been a lot of unplanned disruptions, but I think it's good to see that a lot of fintech startups have still stayed resilient throughout the last. And it seems like the industry in general hasn't really toppled over like some others. Why do you think it's managed to stand on its own feet compared to other industries?
To be honest, it depends on where you are in fintech space. Most of the founders, if you ask them, they would say, oh, we have a skyrocketing growth, da 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 da. I'm not saying that they don't say truth, but I feel there are a lot of challenges that they're facing. Like, say, lending companies, they lend money and people can't repay because there's no economy, no income. Or say, just overall economy. Yes, on one hand, like digital payments and everything goes digital. Yes, you could see the growth, but I don't think you can say about the whole fintech industry that, yes, it's resilient. Like, look at the UK challenger banks. How to attract deposits from people now if they're running out of savings? How you lend them? That's just, yes, on the payment side, transactions, maybe everything digital. Yes, it definitely helped the pandemic. Or like investing stocks, also huge growth this year because of the market situation. But I would not generalize it across different verticals. I think it's vertical by vertical. But in general, I'd say we are now, it's like 2-3% of the overall sort of fintech. Like fintech is like 2-3% of the financial services. That's where we are now in terms of, say, market capitalization. So it's a huge, huge growth ahead for that industry. So we are like in the early days of e-commerce, if you could compare that. And where e-commerce now is Amazon, with Alibaba, with all these players. So I feel like it's early beginning of where we're going to be. And I think 5 years, what we've seen, it was like crazy growth in this industry, which also helped to grow our event together with the industry. But we are far from getting like to the point where it's already saturated. I think many are starting to realize only now the importance of that. So yeah, I think at least next 5-10 years, it will be continuing. That's what my feeling. There's a lot of more exciting things gonna to happen later rather than already happen.
In terms of beginnings, I think if you look back, the digital bank era has really kicked off Hong Kong. There are countries that are on the verge of, granting the licenses for digital banks, especially in Singapore. What does this really mean for banking in general and for consumers moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest change is 5 years ago, no one could even think about that we'll have 8 digital banks in Hong Kong. When we started, there was something unbelievable if someone would tell you a few years and we'll have 8 virtual banks. Back in the days, we actually invited the first companies, speakers we introduced to Hong Kong audience. We invited some of the Chinese companies like John Ang and Lufax and the CEOs, and we had the president of Ant Financial. Back in 2016, people were curious. They didn't really realize how big these companies would be in a matter of 2-3 years. You see where is Ant Financial now, where is Lufax with recent IPO, where is John An, and so on. So if you look at 8 digital banks in Hong Kong, obviously it brings a very new sort of level of competition. Choice for customers. I think for the existing incumbent banks like Standard Chartered, they also launched their own digital bank, but HSBC is competing with their own service like PayMe. But already fees went down, like HSBC and other major banks, they canceled their fees for if you don't have a certain amount of money on your account, then you would have to pay the fee, a monthly fee. Now they stopped charging us. So I guess these virtual banks started to kick off because they just newly launched. People have certain trust issues, I guess. They need to get acquainted with them. But definitely, it's a huge benefit for society. And when I just arrived to Hong Kong back in 2010, opening bank account would take you days, weeks. It's still like that for company account, corporate account, for example. You need to wait for 1 month or so and submit different papers. You need to go in person, go to cashier, get some stamps, whatever. That's the whole process of opening an account. The virtual bank, you could just scan, your face and ID, and minutes later you got an account. It's unbelievable back in 5 years ago. So that's just one of examples. But going further, I think it will definitely bring a lot of benefits to the small businesses as well because they are underserved. The one thing that I found interesting in Hong Kong is just also the challenge for fintech is basically a legacy sort of Hong Kong. And it's, I guess, the same as in Singapore. People, for some reason, they go to the branch. Either the bank requires them to go, or they just find that that's the only way it's easier for them to go to the branch. And when a bank asked me to go and sign something, so I would stay in the queue with, 20 other people. And those are not like 85 years old or 90 years old people generation who doesn't know how to use phones. Those are young people of my age or younger. They're standing there. And while they're standing, what they're doing? They stand with their smartphones, of course. They're looking and doing some stuff on their smartphone. So I'm wondering why you can't, just do the same without going to the branch. But as part of the reason is, again, it's like a certain already legacy of behavior, but another problem is that these banks, they don't even offer you this opportunity to do everything digitally. But now it's changing.
Hopefully for the better. One of the biggest worldwide headlines this year has been with the stalled Ant IPO. There's a lot of reasons why it's happened. We won't go into specifics, but in terms of the wider impact from that particular development, do you think there will be any within FinTech and finance in general?
I guess it's always a dilemma, right? On one hand, you need to allow this innovation to further, bring new, better services to people. But on the other hand, you need to make sure that you don't create risk, right? For any industry like that, particularly for finance, when you deal with money, that's where it's more sensitive than others. Imagine it's like a medical sort of healthcare, and then you have innovation there. So how you can bring the innovation, but make sure that the way how you treat people, you don't create risk, right? Like with the COVID vaccine, for example. So same is with finance, because we're talking about people's money. So I guess it's innovators, they want to challenge the existing system, because that's where they will see the opportunity. And in different countries, different regulators, they will react in a different way. Some will more like freedom and flexibility. Someone really will start to regulate everything. Someone will wait and then regulate. There are different approaches with regulators. So I guess in China, because they went through this experience with the peer-to-peer lending, when they actually let it go, and there was a huge, there were a lot of scams, there were a lot of bubbles, sponsor schemes and so on. So I think they don't want to go through another cycle of this, particularly for Ant Financial, just in general. So they trying to take more conservative approach while finding the right balance between innovation and risk control. But again, this is always a dilemma, and that also in many ways stop banks from innovating, but on the other hand, discourages them from innovation, but also kind of in a way protects banks from innovators. So you can allow that competition with banks, but without actually putting the risk on consumers, and that's where the fine line, I guess. And when companies like Ant Financial, that size, they definitely becoming potentially, unlike smaller fintech companies nowadays that are reasonably small compared to big banks, but Ant Financial, which is bigger the size of, Goldman Sachs of market capitalization or something. So that's where I guess the regulators need to find the fine line between this and this. I can't just say particularly about Ant Financial, I guess in general. For any country is like that, but for China, I think they're still pioneering in fintech globally. I don't think there's any country that can compete with China by the scale and the speed of innovation in financial services. I think they're way ahead of anyone else. And I guess they asking themselves whether they need to continue with the same speed, or they maybe a little bit slow down and look how they can manage the risk better.
Okay. I mean, Ant's probably one of the, I'd like to say one of the biggest headlines, but in terms of you personally, what have been some of the big moments or highlights for you throughout the year?
This year? Yeah, basically we woke up in February. So, I can say last year was a challenging year for us, because obviously the situation in Hong Kong with, political unrest and social unrest put the conference in a bigger risk. And of course, even though we managed to bring and increase the number of attendees, we could have it much bigger numbers, because for many people, they were trying to work to come to Hong Kong last November during the things happening. So it was already a challenging situation, and we started to feel that the economy also started to feel this as well in Hong Kong. But we went successfully through this sort of difficult period of time. And we thought there's nothing can be worse than this. And we felt like we already went through all the possible difficulties that we could imagine for this industry. And then, of course, there will be always, might be a earthquake, tsunami or whatever, something like happening. That probably, but the probability was very low. And then we see the COVID, and which basically back in February, we asked ourselves with me and my co-founder, we had a conversation and we thought, okay, what are we going to do? Because it was not clear how long the situation will continue. Online event is such a new format. No one actually did this online events before successfully. But we decided to go all in with this year, and we thought, okay, one option was just to, put everything on hold and come back 1 year later when hopefully the situation will improve. But a lot of things might happen during this year. Another option was to go all in and risk everything and find a way how to make it work. But then if we couldn't make it, we basically will end up in a situation where basically nothing works, there's no business, and we would need to find a way what to do next. But we decided to go all in, and unlike many of our competitors, what we see on the market, many conference organizers were just frozen, or they were still trying to get back to the normal. They were kind of in a wishful thinking mode that they will come back soon, virus will disappear very soon, and they will have their conferences back. And it was a very painful transformation for many conference organizers globally, for most of them. So big companies basically started to lay off people. And my team, we have now around 25 people. Many of their friends, they're the same industry, they end up without a job. And that's where we actually started to hire people this year. So something that definitely sounds like a complete craziness, but we actually hired a few more. And then in August, we decided, okay, we're going fully online. But our biggest challenge was that most of the previous attempts to do online events were really bad, and people kind of discouraged to go to online events. And we set for ourselves target to actually change this perception and show to the people, to the audience, to the industry that actually online events can be good. Of course, cannot replace fully the offline events. Everyone wants to meet in person, but not necessarily need to be miserable Zoom kind of type of events. So we basically hired a few more people. We started to we look at the different other areas, like say sports, entertainment, streaming, like big events, sport events. Or we looked at video news, say CNN or CNBC or Bloomberg. We look at how you consume content through Netflix, through YouTube, TED Talks. We look at the way the format, how you adjust the format, how you deliver this content through the digital means, and how you can replicate this networking element of online environment, but how you can create the mood of the event itself. So basically, we hire people that are working in more like a digital artist and computer graphic software engineers. We work with them, the video professionals. We hired the best team in Hong Kong to do the streaming. They do live streaming of like Cantonese pop celebrities, and we asked them what we could do in the streaming from technical perspective to make it smooth and great. We teamed up with a team in France that developed the software that we could use and customize for our needs. So basically invested all we have into deliver the great possible we could make the experience online for people. And we went to sort of extra mile into delivering this experience. So like say, one thing that you go to conference, if you travel, for example, somewhere, it's always, of course, the conference, but it's also part of the kind of cultural experience, right? You want to visit local places, you want to try local food, you want to go to local, I don't know, bar or museum or whatever, just to understand the culture, some sightseeing. And how you can replicate it in an online environment, that what we felt, and how the Hong Kong FinTech Week will be different from any other online event, right? Partnered with video directors, and we filmed a few series of episodes to give from small transition, like 15 seconds, just to give the feel of Hong Kong with the neon lights and feel of the street and, people and vibe and energy. But also we did like a food tour across Hong Kong by showing different and explaining street food. We went to this AI coffee, kind of a startup that does coffee with the AI, and then AI would analyze the sentiment of what we brought this Mandarin classes, explaining the characters of fintech companies. And so just to add on this element of a little bit of entertainment, a little bit of feel of Hong Kong, make it authentic and different from any other online events. But we also leverage on the digital side by inviting speakers that normally would be difficult to bring to Hong Kong. And we leverage on the scale of reach. So we have over 130 countries represented from all parts of the world this year, which would be difficult to do previously in the physical format. And we managed to work with our partners, media partners like 36KR, and actually stream the content for the first time in Milan, China, reaching more than 1 million viewers in China for the first time, amplifying the event in a much bigger scale. And we managed to make it commercially successful, which is very unique in this industry. I don't know many examples of online event being successfully commercially. We managed to achieve that, and we had a record number of exhibitors this year, over 500, which also helped us to basically build not just an experience and learn a lot this year, but also helped us to get enough revenue so that we can move on for the next year and then come up with something even cooler next year. So that's basically this year, quite fascinating and exciting, and I'm pretty happy with what we achieved, and I feel even more optimistic. I definitely feel closer with the subjects of our conference, because we are talking about digital banks. We are talking about, everything online. And I always feel kind of dissonance with what we actually do as a conference, with this pages, with everything offline, not really digitized. So I feel it's great that we can do the same as digital banks. Like we have virtual banks and we have virtual conference now. So finally we're in line with what we are talking about, So next year I hope we could find a hybrid mode where still we want to bring people together, but at the same time we can leverage on the digital access, because before people wouldn't consider that as an option. But now, because we're kind of getting used to have this conversation over Zoom, getting used to online content, that would hopefully help to still have this hybrid of physical event and digital reach and mix it together. How it's going to happen, we don't know yet. We are working on that. But we have some ideas and we have certain thoughts. We learned a lot ourselves during this online event. So combining this experience and experience that we had from physical event, I think we could come up with something really cool next year. That's our plan.
So, obviously a lot has happened this year across the world and also, I guess, in Finnovasia as well. As you mentioned, you've managed to achieve quite a lot of success, all things considered. So with all that in mind, just as a bit of a final question, what do you think is the biggest takeaway from 2020?
Taking the risk, that I feel like, I guess, this is the only way. If you want to succeed, you need to take the risk. If you want to minimize any risk and just make it super unlikely in such a situations like this, when everything market is growing, you could take a moderate risk and, slowly grow with the market. But in a situation when everything collapsing, you need to really act and take the big risks in order to achieve something in this situation. So that's my biggest takeaway, I guess, apart from all this kind of cliche stuff that, transformation, There are events in the industry that really understand that and they took a risk and they took this as an opportunity. But majority of them, they basically collapse in a way. And for us, it's a great opportunity because everything is level now. So before we had some competitors that were in place for years, but now everything is zero down and from scratch. And if this industry, people are still hoping that things will get back to like they were before next year, I wouldn't think so. And what we see in the financial services industry, we see the same happening now in our industry. What we saw happen in media industry back in 10 years ago, when people had newspapers and magazines, no one reads that anymore. Everything is digital now, right? So that would be happening already happening. But I'm feeling optimistic about that. I feel like there's actually a huge opportunity to make some difference and really change the status quo of where these events and conferences were and really bring a new page in the history and then start to write it from the scratch, and we'll see how this whole thing will develop in the next years.
Fantastic.